moved here. A little, like a little, yeah,
Razor ones.
Yeah.
I love those.
yeah.
Where
26
did you
years.
get it?
Like the realtor gave us a little welcome package and a calendar.
All right, the 30-second grace period is expired. I'm gonna go ahead and start. Welcome everybody to the March 9th Lexington Planning Commission meeting. And first item we'll do is call to order, and second item is approve the agenda. We have a nice streamlined agenda today.
Need a motion?
Yes.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Anyone-
Second,
All right, motion and second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Next, we'll approve the February 23rd meeting minutes. Any comments, changes, addendums?
I did have one. Did you have something? It's more of a follow-up. The minutes are great. It's a follow-up to one of the issues in the minutes. So we can take that up later.
Okay.
So
Is it follow-up to what we discussed on February 23rd, or what do you mean? Where do you want to follow it up, right now, or?
on page five, at the very end of the minutes, just the South Lexington opportunity area discussion. I just wanted to find out what the follow-up is.
Hmm.
We didn't conclude that in our discussion. We just stated that it's an issue. So that's why the minutes are correct. But I think we could take it up as an issue under other business.
and actually, I thought we did follow up. I thought we were going to put it in the file and do it when we do our next round of amendments. But we can talk
Let's
about
do,
that later.
I just like a summary
Okay,
then of
yeah.
it. I don't remember a
Okay.
clear ending.
Right.
Yeah.
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Next item, citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Sorry. Yeah.
You're just did the minutes.
All right, I'm not seeing any, so we will proceed to
All right, that's okay. That's okay.
item 5, new business. This is a continuing discussion on zoning ordinance amendment 2023-01, accessory dwelling units. So, Arnie, let's pick up where we left off.
How long y'all want to go?
Six.
Totally up to you. What we'll keep going until y'all tell me to stop.
Yes, 6 is fine. Yeah.
Target 6.
I think
Just as a quick update, what we've done so far, and this is again is just quickly definitions. We already have the attached one. So the detached one says a complete independent dwelling unit with a kitchen and bath designed, arranged, and used for intended occupancy by no more than a certain number of persons for living purposes and meeting the standards of section 11, which will have use and design standards. They're supposed to be clearly incidental subordinate to the main unit. And when containing in a separate, fully detached structure from the principal structure of a single family dwelling unit, such accessory dwelling can constitute a detached accessory dwelling unit for which a separate street address is required. And again, just trying to go through quickly what we've done so far, so it may inform as we go forward. On your use matrix, conditional uses in 4 of our zoning districts is what's proposed. Number of ADUs, it says no more than 1 per lot, provided the parcel meets the minimum lot size and minimum setback requirements for the district. So presumably if it does not meet, then you could not put up a new accessory dwelling unit that is detached. General standards, I'm not going to read all of those, but follows up a little bit more what I just said about same minimum lot size for the accessory as for the minimum lot size for the primary. Types of structures, they have to be fixed to a permanent foundation. Size of ADUs, this is what we talked about at the end of your last meeting. For an attached ADU, it would be 40% of the gross floor area, no more than 750 square feet in size. And for a detached unit, it would be 40% of the gross floor area and no more than a total of 800 square feet. Any questions about that quick summary?
I have a question about going back up to D, the number of ADUs per lot. What exactly does that mean that the lot, that the parcel would meet a minimum setback requirement? How does a parcel meet a setback requirement?
In our lot requirements table, we would have all of the setbacks for each zoning district.
Right, but that's for a building, right? Not the parcel itself.
Okay, no more than one per lot provided parcel. Yeah, true. So it would be a parcel meets the minimum lot size and the structure, the proposed structure meets the minimum setback requirements, I guess is
Right,
the point.
yeah. Thanks.
Where are we?
Sorry, we're on page
11.
11
Mhm.
at the top, D.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one question just as a kind of review under the question of types of structures? In case, suppose someone says, why does it have to be on a permanent foundation? Why can't it be say a tiny house that we roll in? What is our thinking here? Just to review for me, because I'm trying to remember.
It is part of our requirements for building code. So the building code says a permanent structure has to be tied to a permanent foundation. Anything that's on wheels is classified as an RV and would have to go to an RV park. And there are zoning standards for RV parks, and we don't
Right.
allow
We
RV
don't-
parks or mobile home parks for that.
And is it a safety thing? In other words, in case that it's not as safe, it could blow away, roll away in a storm? Is that, or is it just that we're saying we don't have a mobile
I believe
park
it's
zone?
for a permanent structure as opposed to a temporary thing that's on wheels that goes down the road
Right.
from place to
Mhm.
place. That for permanent structures, they got to meet a minimum building code.
Right.
And those
Okay.
things do not. And that doesn't mean
Okay.
that if we had more land area or if we had some deep desire to create a RV park down at Jordan's Point Park, as an example, that we could do that, change the zoning code and accomplish
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
But it's not the intent, at least as I see it, to have tiny houses on wheels parked in yards and acting as a dwelling unit.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, following the big red arrow again. The next conversation is about lot coverage limits, and we got into this a little bit last time. There was some concern about covering too much of the lot area, depending on where this accessory structure goes. Presumably it's in the rear yard, maybe a little bit in the side yard, but then also how much of the lot do we want to cover? And the sample from Charlottesville, which is I think the only example that we had that had anything to do with lot coverage, says accessory buildings may be erected in a required rear yard, provided that in any residential zone, accessory buildings and structures, when located within the required yard, cumulatively shall not occupy more than 30% of a rear yard. So then the question I would think is, what is a rear yard? And the definition for Charlottesville for a rear yard is included there on the bottom of page 5, goes over to page 6. And that's one of those definitions you have to read once or twice to sort of understand what the heck it is they mean and where. But they do have a definition for rear yard. And then just to further that, I provided you with our yard definitions.
Yeah, that's all.
So just to see, sort of comparison between the two. And I've made one note at the bottom of that section, which simply says that we do not have standardized lots for the most part. We're not a 50, 60, 70s subdivision where you have a very standardized pattern of development where all the houses along the street are 25 feet back from the street. They're roughly 1,200 square feet in size as a footprint, 1-story, 2-stories, doesn't matter. And they have a rear yard of 50 or 60 feet. So we have non-standardized throughout the city. And we don't currently do any requirements, minimum lot areas. So this would be not something new because we've had it in the past, as I pointed out in this section, that we did have 1,000 square foot minimum open area in the rear yard. But another part of that, it was sometimes difficult to figure out what met and what didn't meet that requirement because of our non-standard yards. Not to discourage you from coming up with any sort of minimum or maximum lot area or lot coverage standard, but we do need to make sure that we can, in my opinion, develop it in such a way that is really easy to understand, not just for me as a zoning administrator to be able to figure out what is included or what is not included in that calculation, but for our public to understand that, our property owners, when they come in, what is the rear yard, what constitutes open area, and how much coverage can we have?
I liked, not to jump forward, but your setback requirements that you're proposing, I think it may take care of that
Okay.
if we use and not be necessary to have.
Not do a coverage necessarily.
And because the other question there is, there's no requirement that anyone has to have a rear yard. And if you were going to do new building, suppose you had a lot, you could cover the entire lot up to the extent of the setbacks. As long as you have the setbacks, you can cover all of it as much as you can cover, right? So, and you could put an addition on. Suppose you do have, rear,
Mhm.
and you decide I want to put an addition on. You can cover as much as you want up to the setbacks. So, what is the thinking behind saying if we're going to do this, you still have to leave a certain amount uncovered? Like that's, in other words.
I think there was a concern at the last meeting about sort of environmental concerns, stormwater in particular, as I recall it. If there was a concern of covering too much of the lot with impervious area and how that would potentially affect stormwater quality, not just on that lot, but neighboring lots and then throughout the city as that water makes its way. I'm not sure if I'm covering, was it just stormwater, but that's what I think I recall for the most part.
I mean, for me, the stormwater would be a major issue, but then also you would have just sort of like the street trees and habitat for whatever critters.
We don't have it, but other places have 50% lot coverage maximums or 30% open, they are our calculations or standards for some of that. We just don't have it. Or what we did have for about the 1,000 square foot in the rear yard, we no longer have.
And is that something that we would put in here? Or
Or the
would that be-
accessory dwelling, we're only talking about accessory dwelling units, so I'm
Right.
hoping we're not going to open this up necessarily, but if there's still a concern about the new detached accessory, let's say it meets the setback requirements, are we looking to potentially put additional requirements on it that you would also have to meet some sort of maximum rear yard coverage, however that would be calculated?
Yeah.
If sort of the research of other Virginia districts is still consistent, and Charlottesville is pretty much the only area that has any sort of mention of lot coverage limits, like I'm inclined to not dwell and try to spend a lot of time on this issue, and maybe unless there's some sort of expert that wants to talk about best practices and buildings, I feel like we're creating, but I don't know. My suggestion is we just move on and not include lot coverage unless other people agree that it's an important thing that we need to consider. But I'm not an expert at sort of best practices for how much space of a lot you need to leave green and open for tree canopy for whatever stormwater management. So I don't know.
I think we
just-
can safely say that it's more than nothing. Or, I mean, right?
Mm-hmm. What's more than what?
Well, I mean, you need more than no. You need some land to absorb stormwater. So I would say that it's worth considering having some minimum required. I don't know the answer to that, whether it's 50%, you can't cover more than 50% of the lot or.
Yeah,
with-
but back to what Pat said though, is what's the difference between building an addition onto your home that meets the setback requirements, which is allowed versus an attached or detached dwelling. So, I mean, it's just adding adding restrictions for this one specific use case.
Right, and that's why I think that that would need to be addressed. That was what I was trying to get at with asking whether that's something that we would address here or whether we would need to open up some other part of the code.
What we're addressing here is just
I know.
accessory dwelling units. So if you're asking whether or not we could go back and look at all of the lots and develop lot coverage standards, yes, we can, but staff hasn't been directed to do that yet.
Right.
I think it's between the setbacks and the limit we're going to put on the size of the detached dwelling unit, you're not going to end up covering the whole
Right.
yard, every square inch to the setback limit. So I think, and that's what Leslie was, I think that it probably will take care of itself in terms of leaving some portion of the yard.
One other thing to add, which isn't going to completely take care of the issue, and I also don't know enough about this. I'm a little bit stepping into something that I'm a little bit wary of, but our stormwater utility is probably going to happen. And is my understanding with that utility, they can be set up in several different ways, but there will be potentially incentives for one, sometimes there's a residential equivalency unit. So we're all going to be charged some fee, which will go into a pot for a enterprise type function where there will be stormwater funding available. So that, and then I think there was also talk, if I'm not mistaken, that there might be some incentive for residences to have, you might be able to reduce your fee a little bit if you had a rain garden or you put a rain garden in, or you had a rain barrel, or so that's not going to take care of exactly what you're getting at, but that may help sort of at least the overall stormwater quality issue as we build up funding in that enterprise fund. I guess it's enterprise, and then would be utilized for improvements throughout the city.
I think I'm gonna rest this. I mean, for me, the issue is probably gonna have to be addressed somewhere else within the code. I don't think this is the place to do it, is what I'm trying to get at.
Okay, so let's get into ADU setbacks then. There are two examples there, one from Arlington, one from Charlottesville, and the other ones didn't seem to have additional setbacks. And then I took a shot at crafting something, which is the staff's recommendation, but item D there, which is as follows. Any detached accessory building approved after, and I just picked July 1st, presuming that whenever the date of this new ordinance is, that contains an accessory dwelling unit, dwelling shall comply with setbacks as follows. So trying to break it down a little bit, maybe with R1 and R2. And I think what I heard at the last meeting was there was a greater concern for these additional uses on the lot, and perhaps they needed to have a greater setback than what we have currently for those zoning districts. So hearing that concern for greater setbacks, it just took a shot at for lots in the R1 zoning district, the nearest wall of the accessory building shall not be located closer than 15 feet to a side or rear lot line. And in the note there, R1 currently has a side setback of 10 feet and a rear setback of 5 feet for accessory buildings. So the proposed 15 feet isn't magic. It's one of those arbitrary numbers. So just to pick something above the minimum 10 foot and minimum 5 foot that we currently have, and that 15 feet can be whatever you make it. But again, just trying an attempt to compose something that gets to what I think I heard, which was a need for a greater setback than the current setbacks for the R1 district as an example here. And then the same type of thing in R2. Any comments on that proposal?
I thought that was great. We can talk about garages. That might be, and you do have that as number 3, because I think that'll be kind of the tricky area, but I like that proposal.
And how do you, I mean, you have a note down here that we need to determine if an ADU can be installed in a structure that's non-conforming with regards to the setback. So I'm just thinking about, like, okay, so somebody, I don't know how many people are going to want to actually build a whole new structure versus have a structure, a garage or whatever that they want to, convert. But that's what you're talking about, right? There, that let's say I have a garage that I want to put an apartment in. Then we would have to have addressed how these how these apply to an existing situation.
That is correct. I'm trying to see, trying to think of it as a new structure now, what setbacks. And then we have to also consider what happens with nonconformities. I can think of a number of garages in particular. One property that's along Sellers had a 2-car carport in the back, and I cannot tell you, there's an alleyway back there, maybe a private alley, not a public alley. But I cannot tell you how close that structure, but they wanted to put an accessory dwelling in that structure. And at the time, currently it's not allowed. So it said no. So they decided not to purchase that. But if the structure is already there, with walls or without, the structure is already there. And do we want to allow this additional use to go into that structure if the impact is already there? Now, yes, this is a greater use, greater impact, having somebody live in this rebuilt carport than just parking cars there. But we do need to consider not just setbacks for what this new thing is, but those things that are non-conforming and are detached. Do we want to allow the accessory dwelling to go into that? And then if somebody asks specifically, the 2-car carport is not large enough, I want an extra bathroom and I want an addition, I would presume the new portion the new structure, new construction portion of that would have to meet the setbacks. And then likewise, if it's 1 story and it's in the setback, do we allow a 2nd story to go on that in the setback or not? So those are some things we have to consider.
So is it possible to say that as long as let's call it a garage, is within the current permitted setback, so the side yard of 10 feet and rear yard of 5 feet, or it can't get closer? You can't have an accessory dwelling unit closer than 10 feet from the property line. Is that too?
I'm sorry, was that for existing or for
an
new?
Existing? Like, can you say for an existing garage, can you say, okay, you have an existing garage, it's 8 feet from your property line. Sorry, that's not going to go. It has to be within the current minimum setbacks.
For an existing, you can say it's non-conforming and we'll allow it to go in, or it's non-conforming and we're not going to allow it to go in unless you meet whatever setback we put in.
Okay.
I think that's the answer to your question.
Yes, I think that
Depends
is
on how we write it.
Okay.
But yes, you do have the ability to say that's a non-conforming structure, but this new use, we don't want it going into that portion of the non-conforming structure that's not conforming. It could only go into the conforming portion of the structure. And by conforming, I mean simply where it is with respect to the rear lot line.
I can think of just walking around town that there are a lot of garages are at the rear. Or the setback requirements are not what we would like under existing structures. So I think that case is going to come up a lot. I mean, I have one just like that. It's probably right on the property line or very close to it. And if I wanted to do an ADU there, I would assume I'd have to, whatever we agree on, I'm not going to rebuild on the existing garage. I would have to move everything in to meet the setback requirement. Because in our case, it's a gravel, it's not worth trying to work within the existing envelope and dimensions of the building. So and I could see a case where it's going to be something we need to think about, because as the town densifies over time, we have to think about what kind of space do you want between the structures? Because you could come up with a really useless space too. So it needs to be a dimension that makes sense. And that's what I think Arnie is trying to push us to define.
Right.
And I think it makes sense on a legal non-conforming like garage, say, you allow that case as it already exists. However, if they want to tear it down to add a second story above it, I mean, in that case, you have to start with the new right, which I think is good. I mean, I like the idea if they want to repurpose it, or like that one that came up on Edmondson. It seemed like a good use for that structure. It's going to be renovated. It makes sense to allow it in cases where it's going to be used in a new way, but in the same location. But yeah, if you're going to expand it, go up a second story on a garage, then you should have to comply with the new standards.
Do we need to think about safety on any of this? So for example, if you start moving things back, I mean, I don't know, that's, I mean, presumably the setbacks are there in some way. It's like along the ones like you're talking about that are really crowded and aren't an appropriate setback from the backyard, but does that create a problem when we make them ADUs?
We will have to follow all of the requirements in the building code for safety, life safety. But more particular, and that's, I think, why number 3 is in here about the garage. It's not uncommon for there to be additional setbacks for garages, particularly off the back of the property, because if the garage is at 5 feet off of the property line, and let's say the pavement, it's a narrow alleyway and it's 10 foot wide and the whole thing is paved, and then the garage can be put within 5 feet of that pavement, you can't park your car in 5 feet. So a lot of times they'll have 20 feet because a car roughly is 20 feet in length, not all of them, but so sometimes they'll say 20 feet. And I presume that's where they had this, at least not all the 10 feet, but the 10 feet may have come from that type of idea that if you're going to have a garage and you want to park in front of it, because everybody fills up their garage and you can't park in the garage anymore. So the car, if it's sitting in front, you don't want it to be a safety hazard and block the alleyway.
I guess I'm thinking more of, I think to what you were speaking of, maybe Shannon was speaking of, that people are converting the garages into ADUs. Yeah. Is there it's not an appropriate setback anymore. They're conforming, legal non-conforming. Is there anything we need to do in terms of the safety of those buildings? I worry about crowding in alleys or something like that if people are living right on there.
Mm-hmm.
But the setbacks aren't really usually for safety, right? They're just for, right? I mean, they're
Health, safety, welfare, light and air and other things. So,
yeah.
and able to get this enough of a distance from any other structure so that it can be scrubbed by the fire department when it's on fire, that type of thing. But the other thing also to think about is that alleyway, if it's 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, that's also a buffer in and of itself. Because you're not going to have another structure that's close. So sometimes that's why a lot of times in the rear yard, you're allowed to get closer to the rear yard setback than in other cases.
But we are talking about keeping the 15 or 10 or 15 feet setback from the rear yard as well. I'm just thinking about like so our side yard, we have at least one property that's their rear yard butts onto our side yard. So you see what I mean? Right. And I don't think that that's completely uncommon in Lexington. So I think we have to be thinking, plus all the people who have corner lots are going to be impacted by this as well.
It may also be helpful the next time that if we have the GIS up and we can go to your lot and look at the neighbors and figure out they can be 10 feet or 15 feet, whatever we decide, and how close that gets to your side lot. So maybe that'll be, or we can even do that now, it appears. So I think sort of that calibration is going to be really important. So once we get through sort of the first cut draft, maybe we all think of a number of different ones, and I can probably come up with 10 off the top of my head that we would need to make sure that what we've written meets or what we want it to meet.
Right. I think we just need to be mindful of worst case scenario. Of making sure that we're addressing that sort of thing.
Well, and that's why I liked what was proposed
Yeah.
because it's greater than
Exactly.
the current.
The only thing that I'm concerned about is the existing structures. Like if somebody wanted to, so all right, our now this is not an exact. Okay. Our next door neighbor is that's a house that was built, I'd say maybe 3 feet off the property line. And so our driveway, and then 3 feet, literally from here to here is their house, is their windows. And so you walk up and you can literally look into their windows. If they went up a story, for example, if let's say that instead of that being a house, let's say it's their garage. If they went up a story, but they were, already out of conformity, it was a non-conforming use, would that be allowed? And that's the sort of thing that I think we want to be mindful of, not in my case, but I'm thinking more garages.
But
that
if
are
you're
actually-
rebuilding it, then you have to meet the new standards, don't you? Or if you go up that
Well,
much.
but if you're going up, is that a new structure? Is that
The
considered new?
interpretation that we have now, let's say you have that accessory structure, that garage, it's on the rear property line
Mhm.
and it's 20 feet in width. So 20 feet of encroachment into the rear yard setback. We will allow you to tear that thing down. Let's say it's decrepit, structurally unsound. We will let you tear that thing down and put it right back where it is. And if it has a low roof, you can barely get your Suburban in there. If you need to construct it so it's 6 inches, 1 foot, 2 foot higher, we allow that. But once you add on that second story, the interpretation has been no, that second story that's new, that has to be pushed back 5 feet. And that makes a really awkward sort of jut in the building. And I can't think of any examples where people have actually torn something down and then rebuilt it in that meets the setbacks in that type of case. But those are, again, things that we need to be concerned about. And for some reason, I'm not sure why I have the note here that we got to think about that. I presume I thought some later point, but no, this is actually the correct section to think about that. So we'll have to give you a little bit more language, certainly, to deal with nonconformities.
But they could repurpose it. If it's a 1-story,
Oh, yeah.
rebuild it and as the same size, but repurpose it, and that would be okay, which I think that makes sense. You're used to that structure being there. Granted, it's being used differently.
And you particularly mean repurpose it for an accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, right.
So even if it's on the property line though, because I think that
Right.
that gets to I think that gets to my concern about. So let's say that my next door neighbor's house was actually a garage. And I know that there was never going to be anybody doing whatever behind their windows. But then all of a sudden they wanted to convert it into an ADU. And then all of a sudden I'm going to have people who are living 3 feet away from my property. That feels like an encroachment on privacy, but
I would, if I have a similar case, because the house was on the adjacent lot was built right up. I mean, the setback is, well, it's probably proper, but it feels like that if I redid that as an ADU, then they could be really cheek to jowl. So
But it's already a house.
it's,
A
the
garage.
adjacent parcel is a house, the one on on our lot, it's a garage, but it's just really on the lot line.
Yeah.
So Arnie, if these sort of non-conforming detached structures that we're talking about, garages or workshops that have been built right on its property line or very, less than the setback. Those are non-conforming, and then the use is conditional. So does that mean that somebody would go through an application and say like, well, I would like a conditional use to be able to use this for this new use, or do they? And then it just comes to planning commission and we can do a case by case basis
That's a good point about there is that extra step. The way you have it now, you have a conditional use permit needed for an accessory dwelling that's detached in the R1, R2, RM, and RLC. So yes, they would have to come in. But it would also, but we still need to have the standards written that says, and not leave it open-ended, nonconformities, you're going to handle it this way. New structures, you're going to handle it that way.
Yeah. Right. Okay, that's good. Let's work on that. I guess people, instead of like trying to find every single property in Lexington where there's going to be an issue,
Mhm.
like, yeah, if we can,
We didn't do the complete research, so we need to definitely fill in that part of it to give you something to chew on as far as nonconformities go.
I don't think that you're right, Blake. We don't want to do every lot in town. I think there are some patterns though, and I think that's what Shannon and I are talking about.
And I like the idea, you know, of salvaging a building that's already in existence, even if it means repurposing it. And I think a lot of times, especially with like these garages we're talking about, they're pretty small structure. I mean, none of the old garages are large that I know of. One of those, that building on Edmondson is a different situation. I don't know if that was always an apartment or what. That one's large, but most cases the garages are small anyway. So I don't know that it's going to cause a big change in dynamic for the neighborhood or character of the situation if you now are letting somebody live in there.
Maybe if it's on an alleyway, then there's separation between the next rear yard. If it's not a rear yard, side yard sort of configuration, if it's rear to rear and there's an alleyway, maybe that's allowed for filling in an old garage into an accessory dwelling unit. But maybe if it's in a different configuration where it's too close to the property line on the side or something, maybe we can write it in such a way that it accomplishes it maybe on an alleyway that's at least 10 feet in width or something to that effect.
That's a good
The
point.
way
Bill.
you described it, Arnie, and there was a case like ours, we wouldn't be allowed to do it because we would have to, basically it would be a tear down and a rebuild. And if we just kept the same dimensions, then it's okay. But if we did anything in addition, then it's not okay. The
Well,
way
it
you
depends on
described it.
how you want to construct it, but you're on the side property line, your
Mhm.
garage is on the side.
Yes,
So whatever that,
no, actually technically the rear, sorry.
okay, it's on the rear. So whatever encroachment you have could stay, even if you tore it down and build it back. But again, no second story unless it bumps to whatever setback we put in. And then also if it stays and you put accessory dwelling in it, anything new that gets attached to it on that first floor would have to bump from the setback. So it might be an odd little sort of addition and might not work well with the flow of the structure. But that new part would have to be in the
Well,
setback
in-
requirements.
I made a note in reviewing this today, this section actually, that, and it goes to something Matt brought up, maybe at one point for public comment, but we might ask some of the, once we get something down on paper, ask some of the architects in town who we know to say, would you do us a favor and go through these and give us some ideas based, you know, because we're doing this dimensionally, but we need someone with a little bit with a design sensibility to say that, and you know that if they look at it, they want to maximize the opportunity. And that's what we're trying to understand.
Can I ask about, this may not be the appropriate place to talk about it, but with all these, we're not including any kind of parking requirement? Or is that coming, or did we already?
Haven't
do
It's
that?
got to
coming
it.
up, no?
That's going to be a big one, I do
mean, that's-
believe.
Yeah, yeah, it seems like we're talking about. Yeah, I wonder what, yeah, they have to be,
Arnie, when there's different zoning areas that are on the thresholds of other zoning areas, like say an R1 that is right next to a C1, or R1's right next to parks and open space. Does the setbacks change in that R1? Like say the rear yard is going in the parks and open space. Does that change what you can have in the rear?
Sometimes it does. An example would be C1 zoning district says you can cover the entire lot except when you are adjacent to a residential zoning district, then the rear lot will be 20 feet or 10 feet. So there are specific examples that we have that says if you're abutting, then you may have to do a little bit more than what would normally be required. But that doesn't occur too often in our lot requirement standards.
Yeah, I guess when you, thinking about,
Mhm.
you know, if you're an R1 or R2 and your neighbors are an empty lot of park, or, you know, like, do you need to still be 20 feet away from it versus, because there's no other R1 houses next to you or R2 houses. I don't know.
I guess similar to if you're adjacent to an alleyway or a right of way of some sort, be it public or private. And we right something additional, or if you're adjacent to C1 where there are no setbacks, then you get a reduction or you don't have to worry about the setback. And the same thing with open space, perhaps. Yeah, we could fine tune it that way. Yes. For the R1, is the 15-foot appropriate or a good placeholder for now? It's simply just more than 10 and 5, but do you want to go for anything more than that, or is that a good place to start?
Does that make it really restrictive as to people, to who can actually have these ADUs? I mean, I agree with the 15-yard-foot thing, but I wonder if that means there are just whole swaths of our community who can't just
I have
build it.
no way of answering that in any sort of accurate way. If I wish it was easy to say, okay, going from 10 feet to 15 feet, we cut out 22% of the potentials, but it would be too hard to get to that.
I was just gonna say, I think that the point of an ADU of this whole process is not that we are saying absolutely everybody in town is going to qualify to have an ADU. I think it's making sort of guidelines for or rules about where you can and how, if you want these are the limitations that are being placed on the development, because we want to preserve, some open space or openness or distance between buildings. I mean, that's my sense, is that we may in fact be limiting it to certain areas, except for these pre-existing structures, which is why I think we really have to get that right, because there are a lot of those.
Yeah, I agree with both points. And I guess you don't want to only allow this in the people who have the large lots. It's just same thing with, like, when we were talking about chickens and where you can put your coop, like, the purpose statement literally talks about convenience of families and changing economic conditions and or family structures. And so it shouldn't be exclusive to just the largest lots where we get to arbitrarily set 15-foot buffers around the entire. I just think that we can maybe find some sort of compromise where we're not being. Maybe there's leniency if there's smaller lot sizes, neighborhoods and areas that are smaller lot sizes. But I agree that we don't want to be San Francisco and just be extremely dense. But
Do we maybe want to, after we get a draft down, go back and think about maybe smaller dwellings in some of those areas that have perhaps less of a setback?
Well, that's where the area coverage comes into. I assume that was why you're talking about area coverage, right? That would account for smaller lots. You have to build a small structure on there, but it still allows that. So I don't know.
And 15 feet's not that big. I mean,
15 feet on.
15 feet is not small.
but they already are required to have 10 feet on each side unless it's non-conforming. I think we have to be careful about not changing the character of the neighborhood. I like the 15,
But
the R1.
to play the devil's advocate, or maybe I just don't understand the reasoning. I'm not sure which I'm doing right now. If you're allowed to build a house up to within 10 feet, that's the setback, right? So why are we saying it has to then be a greater setback to put something that's actually going to be smaller than a house that you could put there? Like, I'm not sure I don't understand the reasoning for having more of a setback.
Now, when you asked sort of the setback question earlier, the thing I didn't follow up with is we have in the rear yards, these are primarily apparently going to be in the rear yards. That's where we've sort of indicated they should go. And in the rear yards, the building can, in the R1 and R2 has a 25-foot rear yard setback. And then 10 feet on the sides in R1 as an example. So in that building, the main structure is not going to go all the way back to 5 foot anyway. It's the main building still has to be 25 feet from the rear. So that opens up a little bit of space.
So, okay, so, oh, I'm sorry.
That just opens up a little bit of space in the rear. But I think your point is still valid in that if you can cover a good bit of this, then why are we asking for more setback on the ADU? But I think the answer is partly it's this additional impact, potential additional impact of this use.
I think it's that I didn't understand. So when it says here that the current R1 side yard setback is 10 feet, that's for an accessory building. That's not for
All
main
structures.
building. That's where my misunderstanding was, right? So that's the 10-foot setback for
Existing. sure.
for
Setback, side yard setback, all structures cannot be closer than 10 feet to the side in the R1.
right. So what was the, and then the rear, so
Rear is.
in the rear setback, you
here's
said
your
25
house.
feet. What's the 25
That-
feet?
From the main building. So in the rear is the only one where we have two different measurements.
Hmm.
And because we were mostly talking about accessory structures, I did not further elaborate. The accessory structures have a 5-foot setback to the rear, but the main building has to be 25 feet from the rear.
Okay,
property line.
that's what that was my misunderstanding then. Yes, okay.
So we are allowing this accessory dwelling to be closer to the rear setback than we would an actual house.
So I wasn't playing
But
devil's
accessory-
advocate. I was
The other
misunderstanding.
accessory buildings can be
It's-
5
it's-
feet.
I think it's
So
an
what are you
right?
gonna?
No, I agree. And I still like the proposal.
This
as
is-
is.
Structure, but it's got a dwelling in it, so it's.
Yeah,
This is
right.
And again, all new construction follows that same guideline. So
Mhm.
yeah, we talked about that but that's a plan unit developed, the weather burn or what it's called,
Mhm.
Yes, Weatherburn
weather burn. So if they had a special.
and their
They're especially-
PUD had
Okay,
reduced
so they didn't have to,
setbacks.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Any,
I understand now.
okay, is everybody okay with leaving the 1, 2, and 3 as they are, at least for now?
Mhm.
That's part of staff recommendation, part D.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but I think we might also consider leaving the side setbacks at 10 feet.
Okay.
I mean, if you've got a 10-foot setback and then 10 feet on the other side, that is 20 feet. That's a pretty sizable setback. I mean, my next door neighbor's notwithstanding, right? 20 feet is actually, not a terrible distance between two structures at all. I mean, there are streets that are that wide.
Okay, good for placeholder for now. And then maybe
But-
when we
but I'd
can
like
think
to- I'd like
about,
to consider, I'd like to,
10
and maybe
foot.
just
Would-
keep that in there as or possibly 10, 10
Yeah.
feet. I think the rear setback needs to be bigger than 5 feet for sure. Whether that's 10 feet or 15 feet, I don't know.
okay, so maybe we come back with it as being the rear at 15, but the sides remains at 10, or right in that.
With-
Give you an
with
and or
that, yeah,
option?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
If you just leave the option in there, I mean, but written in there. Either 10 or 15 feet
For the
You understand.
side.
for the side.
And why more for the back?
Well, that's what more than 5 feet. I'm not sure that you need the 15 feet, but I think if
For the
you've got
back or
if
for the
10
side?
feet is from the side of anything, and that's going to cover a lot of the existing. I would think that there would be plenty of existing structures that are 10 feet from the side, but not as many that are 15 feet from the side.
Everybody okay with the garage portion C? It's really being pulled from the one above, which is Charlottesville. It has that same sort of 10-foot
Mhm.
to the alley. Or an alley.
And so the only thing we haven't covered yet is legal non-conforming. Yeah.
And we'll have, that's a good point. I was gonna say, we'll have that for you next time, but to be honest, I'm not gonna be here next week to work on that, so it
Okay.
won't be in your packet for the following week. Okay, we're ready to move on to height, perhaps. We had 2,
10:06. Do we want to leave
Oh,
time for
yeah.
other things? I'm just checking time.
Oh. I assume if we stop at 6, we'll have another 10 minutes of
To
extra
clean this
stuff.
up. Okay.
Good. That
that's
work?
good. Yeah.
for examples for height from Arlington, it says 25 feet nor 1.5 stories. It shall not exceed either one of those two. And I think I'm pretty sure that they had a 1.5 story height definition. And we may actually also, so we can dig that out if you need it. And then the Charlottesville says no accessory unit, I should say dwelling, no accessory dwelling unit shall exceed 25 feet in height or the highest point of the primary dwelling unit's roof structure, whichever is less. So there you're asking people to know what their own dwelling height is. And I could not tell you what mine is, but that would be up to them to have to provide. So is 25 feet, does that sound good? Would you like 25 feet? Would you like to add in 1.5 stories?
25 feet's a lot. And so in the only thing I'm reading that is, does that apply to a garage? Like,
Mhm.
I think these should be 1-story units and they could have a pitched roof. Unless it's a garage.
I
What do
think
you
the way
mean?
I would interpret that was if it's a garage and then you have the unit above, it would have to be, if you did 25 feet and 1.5 stories, then that upper portion would have to have a gable and then you'd have to have dormers for it to be 1/2 story
Uh-huh.
and still be a whole living unit on the top of the garage. It would have to have that roof shape so it has dormers and whatnot in it.
So it'd be the same height requirement, whether it's a garage or a house.
That's the way I would take what we have, what this 25 feet.
Okay.
But if you want to be more explicit in saying that it can only be a 1 story and cannot be on a garage, is that, I'm not sure
No,
that I heard
I'm
that,
kind
but
of okay with a garage, but I don't think people should have a 2-story.
on top of the garage.
On top of the garage is fine, so that would be
Yeah.
2 stories. But the detached unit in the backyard, I'm having a problem with it being 2 stories. 25 feet is pretty. I don't.
Is
Trying to
25
reconcile
feet
that.
a typical 2-story height?
Story is roughly 10 feet and then whatever roof
Roof
pitch
pitch.
you, and then we've gotten into that discussion recently about flat roofs and do you allow a little bit more just for the peak of the structure? Probably not going to be as big of an issue here, but roughly calculated 10 feet per story. That would be 2 stories with the roof on it.
From the entrance to the structure or
Ground level,
Ground level.
beside the front door.
so if
But
they're
what's
on
the
a
front
big
door
pitch,
in a,
if they're on a huge slope.
Yeah.
They could have like. It could be
True.
3-4 stories.
Yeah,
As long as they're okay.
right.
That's what
True.
that Charlottesville example was. Maybe.
Was it? Maybe it was, yeah.
So I don't, so we haven't, maybe I'm just not understanding the Charlottesville. It's just not clear to me. The notion of 25 feet in height or the highest point of the primary dwellings units, roof surface, whichever is less.
you had a 1-story primary structure, let's say a 10-foot sidewall, and then another 5 feet for the peak of the roof. At 15 feet, you could not go and build a 25-foot tall accessory in the
Okay,
back. It would
okay.
have to be 15
Less.
feet or lower.
Okay, thank you.
Now, it is a little bit odd. Highest point of the primary dwelling roof structure, we had to figure out, is that just
Everyone-
roof? Is that the chimney? Is that the antenna that gets stuck up?
Is
Is
that,
that
is that like relative to sea level or is that relative to ground level? Because what if the accessory dwelling is on a hill, on the top of a hill now?
we flood, we don't have to worry about it.
What's that?
We have to flood. If we flood, we don't have to worry about sea level.
I would,
No, I'm just saying though, like.
If
right?
If
The backyard's
if the
higher.
backyard is higher than the front, or than the primary
Okay.
dwelling, and it's 25 feet, then that's
We're
gonna
gonna
be a
have that.
lot of feet higher than the primary dwelling.
Well, I do think it should be one story. I guess I'm going back thinking about the one story, the ADU, regardless if it's in the garage and not including the garage portion or in the backyard, I just feel like should be one story.
Can we provide you with examples of 1.5 stories to see if the garage goes underneath and there's a half a story above? If that,
I'm okay with having a whole unit above a garage, a one story. Is that
So wait.
I think Leslie means if you're building something new, you can't be building a 2-story building.
right? That's
Right.
exactly what I'm
Garage
getting at.
factors into the height though, so it's not 25 feet on top of the garage, it's 25 feet total.
Right,
Including the lowest
Which for a
level.
garage, I'm okay with, but I'm not okay with that in your backyard. I mean, that's a big, I don't think it should be a 2-story structure in your backyard.
Right, only 2 stories if
If it's
you're
on the-
building on top of an existing garage and that's the first story.
Right, because the ADU itself is really only one story. That's kind of how I'm visualizing it, but feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
And if you have a garage that's 1.5 stories, so you've got your garage where you park your car, assuming that you could get in there. And then you have this second half story. Is that with the pitched roof? That's under the pitched roof with dormers and whatnot? That's the half story. So maybe that's the limit,
A story and a half.
is a story and a half.
Does the size, the square footage of the ADU, like if it's only 800 square feet, 2 stories, that means. Can each floor
Right.
be 800 square feet? Or,
If it's one.
so say like we're allowing 800 square foot. Detached dwelling, can each floor be 800 feet, or is it, if it's a
Totally.
2-story ADU, is it like 400 feet and 400 feet?
But
Maximum
Leslie
of
say no
Yeah,
2-story.
800.
Well, I know, I'm just saying that hypothetically though, because if we just say 25 feet and then the builder can do whatever they want within 25 feet.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, I know you
Right, yeah.
propose that. I'm just like, does each floor get the 800 feet? No,
Total area.
total.
So if somebody has a garage in their backyard and it's too close, it doesn't hit the setback requirements. And it's 1.5 stories as it stands right now. If they were to come in wanting to make it into an ADU, but that means they had to build a dormer out of the roof that was just a roof. Is that a new construction or is that how? I just don't, I mean, I'm imagining that.
as long as, let's say, the roof doesn't change with or without the dormer, so it's tall enough to actually fit, which most garages are going to be low pitch. I'm not sure it's going to happen. Let's presume that the pitch is high enough for you actually to put living space in there. And then the question is, if that dormer does get kicked up towards the rear, does that thing cause a problem? That's one of those things. It's only like adding 2 feet extra height because you got a suburban is not a big deal, but adding a whole extra floor is a big deal. So that might be one of those judgment calls.
So dormers would be problematic.
If
potentially.
it's one little dormer, because you're trying to get a little bit of light into that side of the building, but if it's a whole shed dormer and a shed dormer is
Oh, right,
the
the
length
whole
of the
side.
whole
Yep, yep, yep.
building, then no.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of
Right.
judgment. The definition that we currently have of half story, and I'm pretty sure the Charlottesville actually had a nice little diagram, but we don't have a nice little diagram. We could always add one. Half story, a space under a sloping roof, which has the line of intersection of roof decking and wall face not more than 3 feet above the top floor level, and in which space not more than 2/3 of the floor area of the ceiling and the ceiling next above it. That didn't make a lot of sense to me, but like
yeah.
your knee wall, if you have a slope, you got to have
Yeah.
3 feet. That made sense to me.
Okay.
And, but
yeah,
then you have no more than that before the roof goes up. But that second part I'd have to think about.
okay.
As it so happens, because we're going to go into entrances and where entrances can and can't occur. This is a picture of a 1.5-story house behind me with an entrance, but you can ignore the entrance stairs for now and just look at the 1.5 story and try to figure out how that definition meets. But that's just an example of Also, when we're talking about, well, now it's 40%, but we were thinking if you had a 100% above and we decided to cut it back, so you couldn't have a full
guess-
extra floor, but that's an aside.
Crawl space.
I guess if we're constraining this detached dwelling with setbacks of the rear, the side yards, and we just say 25 feet, which feels like a standard number that a lot of cities use, like why are we just saying, no, we can't have a 2-story accessory dwelling unit, because like what if is it just because you just don't want something big? But I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out why we can't just say 25 feet and however that's going to be, and that it can't be higher than the primary structure.
I think it should be, I would say, I think it should be unobtrusive, and that's why I think I don't have so much of a problem with the garage, because it's still 1 story, but it gets pretty obtrusive at 25 feet. That is big.
I think it gets to the, the expected density, right? If you're in R1, you're not expecting to have to make it have your neighborhood start feeling like you're downtown.
Mhm.
Or if you're in R2, you're not expecting your neighborhood to feel, sort of increasingly sort of populated.
So if we say 20 feet, then that would sort of make it so that you sort of had to stay within that 1.5 story framework. Or you would just have a 2-story flat roof, which people don't do.
Right. Well,
Well, yeah. I'm just saying. The number is like right there, so I just don't know why we
Right.
feel like we have to be like the special
Right.
city.
And I guess, part of the whole discussion, I think in our definition, and as Pat pointed that out last week, these are supposed to be ancillary and subordinate to the main structure. In some ways, I feel like we're sort of skirting our subdivision rules and everything by allowing a whole nother house behind. So I just feel like we should do everything we can to make it as unobtrusive for the neighbors as possible. And I guess that's where I'm
Exactly.
coming from.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I also feel like it seems like a natural fit to have a living space above a garage, like, so how can we fit that guideline in, like a 1-story apartment or flat above an existing garage? So that's gonna have to be at a certain height.
Right.
It's gonna be a tall build, it's gonna be a 2-story structure. Whether it's 20 feet or 25 feet, it's the 2nd story.
Right. And that's, so I almost think you have 2 different height standards, one for a garage apartment and one for a standalone. But does that make sense for everybody else?
One other thing to add that may be helpful is currently your R1 has a building height of 35 feet. And you can go up to 45 feet if you have 30-foot plus side yards. So for each additional foot on the side, you can go up a foot in height, up to 45 feet. And the same thing is your standard in R2. So there is currently a 35-foot height maximum in R2 and in R1. Plus you can go a little bit taller if you have enough side yard setback, just to make y'all aware of that particular.
I guess I agree that we should make sure this feels like a subordinate structure to the primary. So if can we just input some sort of language that the height cannot exceed the height of the main structure, similar to how Charlottesville has it? I feel like that's hitting at what everybody wants, which is something smaller than the primary unit.
So let's say
More
that
than-
if you have let's say your primary unit is a single floor unit, then I'm just working this out. So, and you've got a single, or maybe it's a 1-story with a pitched roof, let's say. So you can't go above the height of the pitched roof, right? But you could have, and it has to be limited, but you could effectively if you had a small house, a small single floor house, let's say 800 square feet, just for kicks and giggles, you could have a second 800 square foot house. Is that correct?
40% of the main dwelling units and no more than 800.
Okay,
I can't do the math, but no.
yeah, that's okay.
It's 160 square feet.
So it's 1,000 foot, it's
There you
1,000
go.
square feet, then, then it's a 400 square foot. Okay, so that works out.
Yeah, but I think, yeah, but that you just brought up a point where if you have a 1-story primary, like I say, you have a ranch, could you not have a 2-story accessory dwelling unit if it's like a room on top of a garage?
Yeah,
Way this is written, you could not.
that's right.
Yeah,
And I think that that's reasonable to not have a second, 2 floors on an accessory unit, because then it starts looking less accessory. I mean, let's say you had a really big 1-floor garage. So let's say you had a
But
4,000 square
but
foot
it has
house,
to be-
right?
Yeah, but it has to be 40% less square footage.
Right. But let's say you had a 4,000 square foot house that's all on 1 floor. It's, just devil's advocate. Then you've got 1,600 square feet. Yes, 1,600 square foot house that you could do 800 square feet, 2 stories high. Unless, except for the height restriction. So again, but let's say you had a garage, then you could have a 1,600 square foot garage apartment that is a 2-floor.
Yeah, but again, in R1 and R2, you can go up to 35 feet, or so 25 feet is well within the allowance for the main structure.
Right, but
I guess I understand that everybody says they don't want to have like a giant, massive, tall, skinny building. But also like having the room on top of the garage, like I don't know how, like there has to be a way to say like you can have the you can convert the attic or the whatever of a garage into a room.
so can't we do that with the 1.5 stories though?
Or just have 2 separate standards, have one for a garage and one for.
I don't mean to kind of bring up something I brought up in the past, but we're talking about ADUs in a garage. And we seldom talked about, okay, where's that person gonna park in the garage?
We just haven't
We'll get to the
gotten there
point.
yet.
We'll get to the parking. It's on there, Matt.
It's on there.
6
But-
meetings from now.
Let's
At the rate we're going, yeah.
let's
6 meetings from now.
for real, I'd like to just finish the height so that we can close this section and move on. Because we've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes now. So
I don't think that was possible.
How about I provide you with something that says 25 feet and 1.5 stories in height, and then provide you with some examples, architectural examples from 1.5 and 2-story ADUs over garages.
Sounds good.
Excellent.
Just to
idea.
take a look at what
Excellent
some
idea. I
examples.
think that's where, when I said we might want some architects to help us out at some point.
all right, thank you very much. Let's open up public comments. All right, I'm not seeing any public comment. And so we will finish the new business. Thank you very much. Moving on to other business.
That was just the staff report. Now we have to.
Oh, we got it ready to have the discussion.
Yeah. I mean, are we following the agenda wrong?
Yeah, we go. Let's go. One more hour.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. Other business, Arnie. Zoning and planning report.
There was an ADU bill, but it was not approved, but it was sent to the Housing Commission for study. And as I understand those happen in the summer. I think the studies, so, and I can't remember, and I may have actually brought it, but maybe it's not worth digging out. But a bill that required people to jurisdictions to allow an ADU to some degree. And again, I don't remember the details, but if, as long as we get something in writing, I think we'll be fine with whatever happens with whatever that bill is after the study. So it would typical, I think, for the study to happen, and then maybe legislation coming back around and whatever the next session would be. Can't remember if there's one in the fall, if it would have to wait all the way till January of next year. Just to make you aware, there was an ADU bill that was put to the side and will be studied in the summer.
But we're allowed to do our own rules.
Yeah.
That would have required us to allow.
And there's no moratorium on anything, so we are allowed to move forward. And typical, as long as we get in before whatever the new thing is, we should be fine with whatever we develop. I don't think there's a hurry. Well, there might be a hurry, but there shouldn't be a hurry because that's going to take a while. Locally, there might be a hurry. There's also that short-term rental bill that I had mentioned before, where realtors were exempted from a whole lot of local requirements. And that has also gone to a housing study commission or a housing commission for study for this summer. So that's been tabled or put to the side for now. We had an inquiry for a small cell facility at the WNL sports fields. And that was several weeks ago. And we forgot to mention that to you. So we were lucky, we were fortunate, we're going through the wireless update for small cells. And then we did get a request, and it's going to be potentially on one of the poles out by the ball fields, which may be in the city and may be in the county. So my counterpart in the county also responded to that email with their requirements. I responded with our requirements, and we haven't heard back from where they might go, but we may actually get a small cell facility.
So is WNL, they're not, somebody wants to do it on WNL property
Right.
and they have WNL approval?
Presumably.
Okay. Well,
So
that's
they
what I
don't,
have. Right, okay.
That would be the primary, because those things, again, do not that I recall how much, but their coverage isn't all that far. So I couldn't tell you if we're standing downtown, if we're going to be able to.
Narn, is this an administrative project? Is this administrative review?
I'll have to review those 7 pages of regulations and get back to you.
I hope we follow all the right workflows and
Yeah,
We'll do our best.
the right flow charts. Okay, cool.
Was also asked to review as part of one of the staff panel 9 proposals that we received for a feasibility study and space needs study for City Hall. That's the first of a 3-part project where space needs and the structure itself will be evaluated. Then architecture engineering designs will be developed in the next fiscal year. And then in the 3rd fiscal year, there's actually money set aside in the budget, at least for now, for actual improvements to City Hall, which Kate and I say, woohoo. WNL submitted a site plan application for the Williams School expansion that will likely not be on your next PC agenda because we do not schedule site plans until they meet all the requirements for that ministerial aspect of it. So it has to meet our requirements before we bring it to you for review.
We get it, it's ministerial. Right.
There will likely be the demolition of the Davis and Baker residence halls this summer. They haven't gotten a demolition permit yet, but that is their schedule, their preferred schedule. Also met with the Walker program participants a couple of weeks ago to review their zoning and other city requirements. And we've done that before with each class as they've come through to talk about zoning and signage and business licenses and taxes to some degree. And that's all I have for a zoning report.
The demolition at Houston and Walker, is that sort of related to something that we were eventually going to be talking about with cottage housing, or is that just, it's just they're doing what they wanted? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for the snicker. That property owner was asked to maintain the property
Okay.
as far as the limbs and the leaves and having a little bit of trouble with compliance there. And then all of a sudden equipment shows up to do perhaps more than just take care of the leaves and the limbs. and
Well,
whatnot.
now the house is on its side.
And all of a sudden went by and the house
Flew
was-
over. Is that on a foundation? I hope that's on a foundation.
Wasn't on a very permanent foundation, apparently.
I think that
So
just
the
killed the
owner was
wicked witch of the east.
contacted about the need for a demolition permit, and he assured us he would be getting one soon.
Okay, cool.
Eventually, the intent, I think, remains for that to be a cottage housing complex.
Yeah.
Or they are still pursuing the,
We haven't heard specifically from
Okay.
him, but when he submitted that application that wasn't complete, that was the intent at the time.
yeah.
Were they dealing with some asbestos remediation or something?
Yeah.
That was the other
Saw
point
One
that,
of those negative air.
Oh, yeah.
Things, yeah.
that was one of the points that we had. We cannot issue a demolition permit unless there's the analysis done and remediation if needed. And then there's an addition to the building. They didn't provide a footprint, but there was an addition to the building, not the separate detached thing that's now on its side. But they did have some asbestos to remediate, and I can't remember what specifically, if it was flooring or caulking or what. But yes, they had to do that. And then we get an environmental report that says it's clean, and then the building official can issue the demolition permit.
Not,
And-
I'm sorry.
Sorry, is there any requirement for people to do architectural salvage on a building like that?
Not in this community, no. And I'm not sure what was left in that. I've never been in the building. And that's been vacant, and has had holes in the roof. So I'm not sure there would necessarily been much to salvage in that case, but it's still a good point. Other jurisdictions do require you to make some effort towards salvage.
Where would that, if we were having that kind of discussion, where would that rule be?
It would be, if we want to do it in the historic district only, then it would be in the design guidelines or something in that section of, I shouldn't say code because those are guidelines, but that would be a good place for it. And then if it's citywide, then we would have to put it somewhere, presumably in the zoning ordinance. I have to
Sorry,
think of-
somewhere.
in the zoning ordinance, and I have to think where specifically. Or maybe it goes into the building. I'd have to think about it, where that might be the best place.
On the small cells tower, did you actually get an application?
No, it was an inquiry.
Oh,
What are
inquiry,
your
yeah.
requirements? We're thinking about going on a pole, a light pole at the Wilson Field or somewhere over there. So I put, these are our requirements, and a link to our section of the code. And Chris Sladen did the same thing. I think he just summarized what they had. So, and that was a month or more, and we haven't heard back. So it was an inquiry.
Are we still in zoning?
Arnie, are you
I
done?
have a zoning question. No, Arnie, the minutes were correct. What my note about follow-up on Maple Lane was just when do we think we're going to go ahead and put up a comp plan amendment to address that? Just to get it on the schedule.
I'm sure, and the city manager just hasn't gotten to it, that he will be directing me at some point to clean that up.
All right. Catalyst project updates. I just want to also acknowledge last week's working session. John and Pat did a great job with the Green Infrastructure Working Group, and I appreciate you all's work on that. It was very professionally presented and done. So thank you. Anybody
Maybe
else?
just a reminder of the North Main Street. Not public hearing, but the
Smart.
meeting that will be held by VDOT at the
Smart
Horse Center
scale.
on the 15th of March, if I
Yep.
remember correctly.
At 4 o'clock at the.
So
Horse
if
Center.
anybody wants to attend that and make
Horse Center.
comments.
Was it really at 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
On the green infrastructure, I just wanted to check if the report and the briefing note is available on the website. Is it easily, or do you have to hunt for it?
Everything on our website you have to hunt for.
Well, no, I mean,
Sorry,
Matt
but-
brought this up a long time ago when we first, near one of our first approvals of it. Whether or not it would be on the website. So if you all could think about where it should go, should it be under the planning documents? Since,
I'm reasonably sure we have it under the planning and development page currently.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
we'll make sure.
okay.
All right. How about a city council report, Leslie?
Sure. City Council met on Thursday, March 2nd, and council approved the conditional use permit from Echelon Resources Incorporated to allow a multifamily apartment consisting of up to 62 dwelling units of new construction at 406 Spotswood Drive by a vote of 5-1. Arnie mentioned the VDOT public forum. And then at our At the next council meeting, we'll have a public hearing and consideration of the boundary line adjustment for the Kirshner parcels that we approved last meeting. And then on Friday, March 17th, is the deadline for the submittal of RFQ proposals for the VDOT property on Waddell Street. The proposals will be presented to the evaluation panel between Friday, March 31st and Friday, April 7th. Then the proposals and recommendation will be presented to City Council no later than June 1st, 2023. And I wasn't going to mention it, but since you talked about that site plan, we've been working on for City Council on updating our code of ethics, which has a section in it on the conflict of interest statement. And like I reported last meeting, the city attorney reviewed it and said there is the state code. So there's a single body of law that we're all supposed to follow. So his recommendation is that we adhere to the state code. As a follow-up to that, David Sigler did submit to the state ethics and conflict of interest executive director the question, can we have our own code if it's stricter? And the response was no, we can't. We have to follow the state code. The only place you can make it more strict is on the monetary limit for receiving gifts. So at our next meeting, I expect we will review the code of ethics and approve that shortly.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Who did he ask? Who did David said that?
The Virginia, it's the panel, the Virginia Code of Ethics and Conflict of Interest organization for the state council. That's what it's, sorry, council.
So I'm slightly confused. Does that actually change the city's relationship to what it originally recommended to planning commission and of last year when we were right before all the master plan?
Yeah, no, that all agreed with because at that time, our city attorney said, you follow the state code, and he went through it and said, no, you're allowed to participate. We will have to ask again on the site plan for the attorney to look at it, make sure we meet those exception criteria.
Okay.
And then to determine if we can participate. But like we have the section in our the planning commission
I was
bylaws,
going to ask.
those are going to have to be revoked because we need to stay in compliance with the state law. Planning commission, we all do the conflict of interest, right? So we are beholden to the state code and the state documentation of our economic statement of interest.
Because I think our bylaws were even stricter. Our bylaws
They
are
were.
even stricter than what the city had,
You're right. Yeah.
and they were not followed. We didn't follow our bylaws on.
Right.
during-
You're right. And we got into the whole thing, the city attorney felt like at the time that
Well, he didn't know. I don't think he knew about our
he
bylaws.
didn't know about the
And
bylaws.
he didn't care also about the city's code of ethics. He just was talking about the state.
Right.
code,
And
right.
that's actually the right way to look at the whole thing. That's how it should have been looked at all along. We shouldn't have had a tighter, we're not allowed to, is what they're telling us. And it is interesting. I can forward the letter from the council. We are either appointed or elected to represent the general public, is what they said. And for that reason, those exceptions are allowed there. You can be conflicted, but you're allowed to participate in those situations. And you should participate in those situations. I mean, you're expected to be a representative.
But
So-
people but now would it then preclude someone from recusing
No, and-
themselves?
Well, and we had talked to our attorney about that. So I know at the city council level, we're expected to vote unless we have a conflict of interest or excused by council. So if we felt like we should recuse ourselves, we can ask council for permission, and most likely they'll grant it. I would assume the same is true of planning commission, but I can bring that up.
So is the code, you use the term law, is the code guidance or is the code a law?
It's state law.
So do we know where, I guess we don't need to get into this full conversation now, I guess.
I have one
Okay.
question for you. What was it that flipped that allowed the echelon properties to go forward? What was it in there? I mean, you had then at the new housing over at not Brubaker, by the hospital. You guys just approved that by a 5-1
Oh,
vote.
right.
So what was it that they did that was adjusted that meant that you guys were willing to move forward with that?
I don't know.
There's a little bit of
Question, please.
design. Some folks,
There
There were-
it was held up, and so it didn't.
Oh,
after we
oh,
did
yeah, right. So it didn't go straight to him because the city had talked to him, Frank had talked to him about, can we work together on redesigning this, on making it fit better with Lexington, and they were very open to that. So we spent a month doing that.
why I
That's,
was-
yeah,
that's why I
sorry,
was-
right,
okay.
yeah.
All right.
I have one, just feedback. Leslie, do you have any feedback on the work session?
I thought it was very well done. I thought that the presenters did a great job, and I thought it was well received by council.
So what would be the next steps? Do you have some thoughts about that?
I
I mean, is it something that we take to the council would consider in a future meeting as in a public hearing, or is it just accept?
No.
Says nice job, keep going, or, you know. that-
Right, and I think the main thing you're looking from council at this point is a representative who's gonna represent either council or the city on the group.
And how does, I think what John's asking is how or when does that get decided? I mean, who does council decide it? Does the mayor?
The
or
mayor
city council?
decides it, right?
And if might the mayor not want to?
He could, I didn't get that impression, but right.
perhaps one other thing to keep in mind was Jim's recommendation that it be given to staff for a staff review, not me, but like staff overall, I think. So I'm not sure if that would
Oh.
also occur, but that was a recommendation that city manager had in that agenda write-up.
That would be great.
So is it okay for us now, to use this plan when we're considering the building, we're having people come before us, maybe looking for variances or something like that? I don't
We
know.
should be
well-
using the comprehensive plan.
It's part of the comprehensive plan now that we. can
No,
use that
no,
guidance.
the part of the green, it was creating a collective impact model organization that would be in charge. So planning commission doesn't.
But we can't use it as guidance for any decision we make going forward.
But there's so much in there that was taken from the comprehensive plan. So there's still a good bit of it that you're still going to be following and
But you should reference the comprehensive
Yeah,
plan, not
yeah,
that.
yeah.
All right, I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So ready.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you in 2 weeks.